Chapter 33. Put It On Me. Surprise! Everyone yelled. Mimi turned to Lamont, embarrassed to the point of tears. What is this? We had a party last week. That was a press thing, Lamont said. Like their party at JoJo hadn't been a total blast. You did that for me. I'm doing this for you. Lena said you wanted to go bowling. He frowned over at Lena as if to say, did you give me some bad information? But when Mimi hugged him and gave him a big kiss on the cheek, he started smiling again. They strolled into the Chelsea Piers bowling alley with Lena, Nate, Jordan, Kiko, Vanessa, Alonzo, and Imani right behind them. Tonight was Mimi's actual birthday, and they'd all just come from dinner at Mr. Chow. Now here was Dickie and almost everyone from the triple large office waiting for them. Glittering banners proclaimed, "Happy birthday, Mimi." After dinner, they had piled into cars, and Mimi thought they were going to a club or something. No one would say. Then their caravan of SUVs pulled up at Chelsea Piers, a massive complex on the West Side Highway. There were some huge yachts moored at the dock, and Mimi thought maybe they were going to get on a boat. She hadn't expected anything like this. She did want to go bowling. Lena kept promising her they would, but they never got around to it. The Chelsea Piers alley wasn't anything like the one at home. Especially not tonight. Lamont had rented out one whole side of the place, about 12 lanes. There was a DJ spinning all night, and 2 TVs hovered above each lane, one for the computerized scores, and one that was playing rap videos on mute. Waitresses would come to your lane to take orders for drinks and snacks. Everything was free, at least for them. A long link-up of velvet ropes kept people from the other side out, though no one was really bowling on the other side. It was all kids, standing by the ropes trying to get autographs from Dickie, Envy, and Fat E. And from her. People knew her from the video and songs she'd done with Fat E. Since ever-watchful Lamont was ensconced down at the end in the VVIP lane behind a wall of security, schmoozing, not bowling, Mimi felt free to indulge in a few Bellinis. He was always warning her about drinking, saying, "Don't be like Lena." But he'd encouraged their friendship, so who was he to talk? She took over a lane with a few of the other girls, Lena, Vanessa, Imani, and Kiko, who was so loud and funny that she made Lena seem shy. Mimi had a blast watching Lena and Kiko trash-talk each other to death. Every time Kiko would step up to bowl, she'd rub her hands before touching the ball and say, "Let me go ahead and get a strike so I can shut this bitch up." In 4 games, she never did get a strike, and Lena took great joy in that. Although she loved the surprise, Mimi wished she'd known they were going to go bowling. Then she would have worn pants. All night she was practically doing a curtsy when it was her turn to roll. The girls kept laughing at her, but she was wearing a thong underneath her mini. At one point during the night, she looked up and caught Lamont staring at her. He waved with an uncomfortable expression on his face. Busted with her 4th Bellini in hand, she waved back and gave him her sweetest "don't be mad" smile. And though Lamont still had her telling everyone she was 19, they both knew she was 21 now, of legal age, so he couldn't say anything. At the end of the party, Lamont insisted she ride downtown with him, because he had a present for her at his house that he'd forgotten to bring. It was obvious that she was drunk. She turned her ankle 3 times in her cork wedges on the way to the car, but he just helped her along and didn't chastise her for drinking. Her head was buzzing like crazy, and he kept the windows open on the way home so she could get some air. When she let out an intoxicated sigh in the car, he patted her bare knee and said, "Enjoy yourself. It's your birthday." That's sweet, she thought. But when Mimi's head lolled back on the car seat, and she started looking rather queasy, Lamont warned, "If you have to throw up, tell me and we'll stop. Don't you get sick in my car, girl." Now there was the Lamont she knew and loved.
Hit the like button.
It was all over for him the instant he'd seen her prance into Mr. Chow that night, wearing a tiny, pleated black skirt. She'd arrived with Lena and Kiko just as everyone else was getting situated. Kiko had done a really nice job with her makeup. Her juicy lips were glossed to a high shine, and the outfit was some fly designer shit. Vanessa had told him the skirt was Chanel. The little lace-up top, too. It looked great, but Christ, a pleated skirt? It was so naughty schoolgirl that he immediately felt the blood flowing inside his shorts. He realized he felt like a horny schoolboy every time he got around Mimi. The first time she'd come to his apartment, he'd imagined what it'd be like to have her. But then he often had thoughts like that whenever he encountered an attractive woman. And more often than not, he got those women. And then the fantasy was over. Ever since the ecstasy incident in the Hamptons, when he'd gotten a peek at her bare little pussy, he'd been thinking about her way too much, wondering how she'd taste, having dreams about her, closing his eyes and picturing her face when anonymous women blew him in public places, thinking about her every time he was inside Kendra. And then they'd gone to L.A., and she'd gotten all starry-eyed over Ray Sean. She was playing herself, hanging all over that ignorant, overgrown boy who'd made his loot the easy way, by being born with giant genes. Fuck Ray Sean. So what if he'd told her Ray Sean had a few kids? He didn't know that to be true, but with those ball players, it was a good bet. She didn't need to mess with him. Ray Sean would use her and toss her aside like all those NBA guys did with women. They were all dumb as fucking bricks, and they wore disgustingly tacky suits. Mimi deserved better. He knew that Ray Sean had gotten her phone number, and he knew Ray Sean would call. So he had no choice but to confiscate her cell and tell Imani to get her a new one with a new number. And he was forced to start checking the voicemail at his old apartment. Though Imani had looked at him oddly when he'd asked for the code, she knew better than to question him. Ray Sean had called the day after they got back from L.A. That pussy crook could barely wait. The message basically amounted to, yo yo yo, holla back. But there would be no hollering back since Lamont promptly deleted it. He erased another one 2 days later, and a third a week later. Ray Sean sounded a bit defeated on the last message. My bad, player. He never called again. Not any messages that Lamont caught, and he'd been checking on the regular. But he wondered if she'd called him. Mimi needed that level of protection. She was like a fawn grazing in the woods, oblivious to how horrible people could be. Look what had happened with that ex-boyfriend of hers. And the role of her protector was one he was happy to play. Mimi was not like all the other women who looked at him with the reflection of dollar signs in their eyes. Mimi didn't want anything from him. She just wanted to write her little songs and make her record. She was busy doing her thing, having fun with her friends, not sitting by the phone waiting for him to call, like Kendra. All these other women who wanted to bag him and become Mrs. Jackson made him feel like the hunted animal. When Ebony had put him on their list of most eligible bachelors, hundreds of letters and headshots flooded the office. What did all those desperate bitches know about him except his net worth? Trouble was, he was actually feeling something for Mimi that he had never felt before. He never obsessed over women, ever. He chased them, lusted after them, fucked them every which way, and maybe even told himself he loved a few of them. But he always decided when it would end, and once they were gone, there was always someone new to keep him from missing the old someone. How did he wind up in this position over some kid? Like tonight. That skirt. She was wearing it just to be cute. Kendra wore short skirts and tight sweaters for the sole purpose of titillation. Kendra had an agenda. Mimi didn't. At the bowling spot earlier, He'd come back from the restroom and glimpsed precious Mimi bending over in that little skirt, accidentally flashing a thin string of black thong and exposing her tight, bare ass. He wanted to dash over and impale her standing up right there on the shiny alley floor. Then Lena and the rest of them started laughing, and Mimi turned around, looking adorably red-faced. She didn't notice him watching, but she caught him staring later, and he felt embarrassed. He was a grown-ass man, a grown-ass rich man with a slew of employees who said how high if he told them to jump. And he had a schoolboy crush. When she caught him staring, he waved at her. It meant too much to him when she smiled and waved back. He had planned to give her his gift after dinner, but then he'd realized that he'd left it at home, so he had the perfect excuse to get her to come back with him. He decided that tonight was going to be the night. He'd held back before because she was on the label, and it could turn into a major headache. But his feelings weren't subsiding. They were getting stronger every day. He wanted to be with her. He wanted to take care of her, spoil her. The mere thought of anyone else's being with her made him crazy with jealousy. He felt like they'd been having months of foreplay and she didn't even know it. Or did she? Sometimes he thought she was flirting with him. Other times he worried she was only being nice for the same reason that everyone else felt they had to be nice to him. Because he was the boss.
Hit the like button.
Chapter 34. Il Nana. Mimi staggered up the stairs in Lamont's apartment, feeling unbalanced from the alcohol and hoping he wasn't peeking up her little black skirt. "You have really nice legs," she heard him say from behind her. She went straight to his fridge and got some water. "Your present's in here," he said, sauntering into his bedroom. She followed, looking through the window at the city lights whose glitter illuminated the room, and sat on the edge of his huge bed. Lamont was in the bathroom. She could hear him peeing. Then she heard the sink running for what seemed like a long time. He came out and picked up a tiny white envelope from his bedside table. It was the kind of envelope that would come attached to a bouquet of flowers. But there were no flowers, just the envelope. It had her name on it. She set the bottle of water on the table. "This is my present?" "Yeah," he said, standing in front of her. "Open it." She pulled out a business card. It read, Victor I. Rosenberg, M.D., F.A.C.S., Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery. She looked up at Lamont. "You want me to get my nose done?" She felt like she was going to throw up. Then, as quickly as the feeling descended upon her, it passed. "There's nothing wrong with my nose." He smiled down at her. "Of course not. Your nose is beautiful." She looked at the card again. "It's not for your nose," he said quietly. "Well then?" "It's so you don't have to be part of the itty-bitty-titty committee anymore." She was momentarily lost. Then, aghast, she shrieked, "You want me to get fake tits?" "I don't want you to," he insisted. "You want to." "I never said that," she said, thinking this was beyond weird. "You said you hated having no boobs." That was true. She hated her flat chest, although she wished she hadn't shared that information with Lamont. And she wouldn't have if Grimy hadn't drugged her with ecstasy. "Just go for a consultation," he suggested. "Kiko went to him." "Kiko has fake boobs?" she cried, shocked. Kiko's breasts were perfect, very natural. She never would have guessed. "Yeah," Lamont said enthusiastically. "He did a good job on her. So think about it. Nobody's forcing you. But if it's something that really bothers you, why not do it?" She stared down at the card in her hand. She didn't know whether to be appalled or thrilled. And you're going to pay for it? Happy birthday, he said, bending over to kiss her lightly on the forehead. She thought about it for a second. Would it hurt? How big should she get them? Would they look as good as Kiko's? Then, helped along by her continuing buzz, she threw her arms around Lamont's thick waist and sang, "I'm gonna have boobs!" He rubbed his hand over the top of her head, laughing heartily. She could feel his belly jiggling. She stayed in that position for a while, warm and comfortable, while he stroked her hair. Then she felt something firm pressing under her chin. She pulled back and nervously looked up at him. "Sorry." He almost coughed, sitting down next to her on the bed. "I should be getting home," she sputtered, suddenly utterly embarrassed that she was in Lamont's apartment in the middle of the night, in his bedroom with the lights off, talking to him about her breasts, or lack thereof, while he had an erection. It was definitely time to go. "It's so late," he said, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Stay here, I have 2 guest rooms." "I can get a cab," she said nervously, and not because she felt pressured by him. She realized that, in spite of her better instincts, she wanted to stay. Here. With him. "What's wrong with you?" she screamed at herself. "He's old. He's fat. He's like your boss." It was wrong on so many different levels. So why wasn't she moving off the bed? He was staring at her, and she felt like he could read her indecision on her face. "Did I thank you for the party tonight?" she started babbling. "That was so sweet. It was so much fun. I was completely surprised." He silenced her with a kiss. She didn't protest. It felt nice. She kept waiting for his tongue to dart out. Jamal used to be all about the tongue. It was like wrestling with him. But Lamont's tongue stayed in. It was just their lips, nibbling and kissing, until she couldn't stand it anymore and stuck her tongue in his mouth. He'd obviously just brushed. They kissed for a long time, and she was thinking, "What am I doing? I shouldn't be here." But she didn't stop. She kept waiting for him to grab her or do something, but he didn't do anything except put his hands on the side of her face and kiss her. She hadn't realized what a bad kisser Jamal was until she had this to compare him to. Finally, Lamont scooped her up and put her on his lap, facing him. Her wedge sandals slipped right off, and she wrapped her legs around his back. She cupped his face like he had hers and suffocated him with a flurry of quick kisses. It surprised her when he began to moan, real quiet. She couldn't believe the big, strong guy who used to make her so scared was producing these mushy sounds. For her. Realizing that she could make him moan like that made her feel excited and powerful. For the first time since she'd met him, she felt like she was in control. Between her legs, she could feel the bulge inside his jeans. She wanted him to take it out. She started rocking back and forth on him, kissing him, and he began moaning louder. He had a hand on her back, and she didn't know where the other one was until she felt a thick finger come up through her legs from behind. His finger slipped into her thong, and her moans drowned out his. The finger slid back and forth in her slick crease. Then he began to rub a spot she didn't know she had. "Look at me," he whispered hoarsely, and pulled back from kissing her while his hand stayed busy. He tried to look directly into her eyes. "I want you to look at me." Feverish with embarrassment, she did just the opposite. She tucked her face into his thick neck. She heard him laugh a little, his minty breath hot against her earlobe. Look at him. She shouldn't even be here. She shouldn't be doing this. But she was. The more she thought about how wrong it was, the more she wanted it. and not just his finger. God, she was dripping all over his hand. She wanted to close her mouth and just silently enjoy it. But she couldn't choke back her yelps and moans and high-pitched squeals. She buried her face deeper into his neck to quiet herself. There was a faint smell of his cologne. She breathed it in. "Mimi," he whispered insistently. "Mimi." "Lamont," she whispered back, eyes shut, still rocking. "No, Mimi," he said, but not in a whisper. She felt his hand slide away. Where was that finger running off to? She wanted it to come back, now. "Mimi," he said in a serious voice. "Stop." She leaned back to look at him. Still feeling tipsy, her snug black top clinging to her damp skin, she vaguely heard him say something. They were the last words she expected to hear coming out of his mouth. She looked at him uncomprehendingly. "This was a bad idea," he repeated. "What?" she cried, flushed with embarrassment and disbelief. She had been thinking the same thing the whole time, but he'd started it. Now she was all hot and bothered. She didn't want to go home, and she didn't want to sleep in his damn guest room. She wanted him to get all up under her skirt and get it going. "This isn't right," he said, shaking his head. "This will just confuse and complicate everything. And you're a sweetheart, baby. You really are. I don't want your feelings to get hurt. And if we do this, believe me, they will." It sounded downright scary what he'd just said. Like he was making her a promise or something. She hadn't thought about anything other than right here, right now. The last man she'd been with was Jamal, and that had been almost a year and a half ago. She looked at Lamont as he stared off into the distance, pulling at a strand of her hair. She couldn't believe how sweet and shy he was acting. She didn't think he could be this way. He was normally so loud and bossy. They sat quietly for a moment until she locked her arms around his neck. As soon as she tried to squeeze, he abruptly grabbed her around the waist with both hands and swung her off his lap, like some Olympic figure skating move. "Yeah, you should go home," he said. "I'll take you down to get a cab." He started to get up, but she swung her leg back over him and said firmly, "I don't want to go home." She knew she could make him moan again. "We're not playing anymore," he warned, sounding like his usual gruff self. "You have to leave. Let's go." "You don't really want to throw me out," she challenged him. She squeezed her thighs around him. "Anyway, it's my birthday," she whispered, "so you can't." She smiled down at him, expecting him to smile back. Lamont stared down at the carpet, having an unprecedented attack of conscience. God, if Nate or Alonzo could see him now, they'd be laughing their asses off. Here she was, practically begging him for it. Had she been thinking about him all this time, too? His heart was beating so fast. He couldn't believe she wanted him as much as he wanted her. No, she couldn't want him that much, but shit, her pussy was soaked in anticipation. God, he wanted to taste it. He'd been fantasizing about her for months. Here was his chance, and he was chumping out. When she'd let out those babyish squeals, Lord, he'd practically come on himself. She was so sweet, innocent. She trusted him. But she didn't know what he was really like. If he started something with Mimi, it was going to end badly. For her. She didn't deserve that. Not that Kendra did either. Kendra was sweet too, though not innocent. He and Kendra were adults. They both knew the score. Mimi was just a child. She didn't get it. He couldn't be with her the way she would eventually want him to be. And her album was important for the company, more important than satisfying this immature fantasy. He couldn't be weak and give in to it. It wasn't worth it. He looked up and she was smiling at him. "I gave you a present and a party," he said, quiet but firm. "You've had a great birthday. It's time to go." "No," she said, and, shockingly, reached over and unzipped his jeans. His fully erect dick popped right out of his boxers. Her eyes grew wide at his thickness. With that gesture, he unreservedly gave in to his desire for her. Who was he kidding? She delighted him by confidently grabbing his engorged penis and smoothly lowering herself on top of it. She was most definitely not going home tonight. Shit, he might never let her go home, because it was worth it. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been this excited. Sliding up and down, her little pleated black skirt looked like an umbrella opening and closing over his lap. He put one hand firmly on her upper back and held her around the waist with the other. With her knees pressed against the edge of the bed, she was gliding on him smooth as silk, and her fluttery squeals were driving him berserk. On the fifth upswing, his breathing quickened to the point of hyperventilation. By the time her ass plopped down onto his thick thighs, he exploded. He couldn't control himself. He was frantically tapping her on the back and tapping his foot on the carpet, grunting, "Oh, fuck! Oh, fuck!" She urgently tried to dismount, but he clutched her in a crushing embrace. He didn't want her to move an inch. He was still quivering and gasping when a breathy exhale of words that sounded a lot like "I love you" flew out of his mouth, at once thrilling and terrifying him. This had to be a dream. He'd said those words to many women, when he'd felt they'd earned it. A deliberate, strategically timed "I love you" was one thing, but involuntarily, no. That wasn't in the script for tonight, and neither was this 1-minute showing. He quickly filled the horrific silence with a breathless apology for his abbreviated performance. "Sorry, baby," he whispered anxiously, still gulping for air. "Sorry, you really got me going. I haven't come that fast since..." She pulled herself off him and stood up, looking terribly upset. "Since I was your age," he cracked and had a cheerless laugh. He'd finally gotten her, the one girl he cared to impress, and he'd humiliated himself. He sat there with his deflating dick hanging out of his falling down jeans. He felt worthless. "Very funny," she said, slipping into her sandals. "You came inside me." "I'm sorry," he said glumly, still reeling with an ill feeling of inadequacy. He grabbed a tissue from the drawer and wiped himself. "Well, I bet I'm more sorry," she said, tramping into the bathroom. She was furious at herself. How could she have sex with him without a condom? Or at all? What was she thinking? God, she was hornier than she'd realized. "Baby," he pleaded, zipping up and following her. "Don't be upset. I mean, what are the chances?" "I don't want to take any chance," she said, sitting on the toilet. "Could you please close the door?" Lamont stepped inside and closed the door behind him, trying to think of how he could save face. "Lamont," she said, laughing a little to herself. "I meant, can I have some privacy, please?" "Oh, right," he mumbled and left. He sat on his bed and sulked. Jesus, could it have gone worse? That was the most embarrassing sexual experience he'd ever had. And if she got pregnant, that would be a disaster of epic proportions. She'd already had an abortion and would probably want to keep it. But that was out of the question when she had a record to promote. In the bathroom, Mimi dampened a hand towel and started rubbing herself vigorously between her legs, like she was trying to get a stain out of a skirt. "I'm so stupid," she told herself. What if he had some kind of disease, like that guy Lena had been with? What if he'd given her something? Ugh! Now she felt gross. She stripped and jumped into the stall shower. The next thing she knew, Lamont was back. "I'm sorry," he called over the loud jets of water. "I know," she said. It's all right. It was my fault. No, it was my fault, he said. Okay, it was your fault, she said. He leaned up against the sink. So, you want to watch a movie? Mimi turned off the water. A movie? It was almost 3 in the morning, and all she wanted to do was go home and forget this ever happened. They'd just had sex, but she realized he hadn't even seen her naked, and she didn't particularly want him to now. She cracked the glass door and peeked her head around. She nodded toward the stack of towels on the edge of his sunken tub. I think I should just go home, she said as he handed her a towel. So, I'll be out in a second, okay? She forced a smile at him. Lamont got the hint. They'd just had unprotected sex, so he thought they were on pretty intimate terms, but apparently not. He walked out, miffed. She came out of the bathroom with drops of water sparkling in her hair, clutching a towel around her body. Lamont, she said hesitantly, do you have anything? To wear? Sure, he said, getting up. I'll give you some sweats. No, she said. Do you have any diseases? Lamont stopped mid-rise and looked at her incredulously. Are you fucking serious? She retreated a step, biting her lip. Diseases? He shrieked. How dare she? Sorry, Lamont, she said. But you get around, you know? And Lena told me this story, and it scared me. Through gritted teeth, Lamont seethed. I am completely clean, sweetheart. I can assure you of that. But his anger drained away as he watched her blink back tears. She couldn't even look at him. She was really upset, and Lamont felt like an ass. Awkwardly, he tried to take her hand, but she pulled away. It'll be okay, he said. If anything happened, if you got, pregnant, he mumbled, hating even to say the word. I'd be there for you, to take care of you. Would you? She snapped, fingers tightening around the towel. Jamal had turned his back on her like she was damaged goods. The way Lamont ran through women, he was probably no better. Or would you be off somewhere fucking Kendra? Wow, Lamont said, completely blindsided by her unexpected verbal jab. He took her hand and held on tight when Mimi tried to pull it away. I apologize for letting it happen, he said sincerely. But I'm not like your ex-boyfriend, and I'm definitely not like any of these niggas Lena fucks with. Mimi had to laugh at that. No matter what happens, I'll be there for you. She quickly wiped her eyes and looked at him. She really looked at him, wondering if she could trust this man. Okay, she said, realizing she was probably venting the anger she still had for Jamal at him. So I could use those sweats, she said, anxious to get going. You can't go now. Why not? Because you're still upset, he said. I can tell. I can't let you be upset on your birthday. He gave her a quick hug and peck on the cheek. And I can't let you leave here unsatisfied, thinking that was the best I have to offer. He pulled her toward the bed, and she went willingly. He laid her down, set a long, lingering kiss on her lips, and then, hovering over her, he carefully unwrapped her towel. He lightly sprinkled kisses all over her moist skin until her entire body shivered. Then he tugged her down to the edge of the bed, planted his knees on the carpet, threw her legs over his shoulders, and made sure his sweet girl had the best birthday ever. 4. Baby Love.